The afternoon she caught me staring. I was holding a glass of water I had already finished. She looked up from her chair on the patio next door, lowered her sunglasses exactly 1 inch, and said, "Can you help me with my back?" That was not a sentence designed for a man with my level of composure. And every single thing that happened after that was her fault. Let me back up. My name is Caleb Harding. I'm 34. I write technical copy for a logistics software company. The kind of job that sounds boring, because it is. But it pays the mortgage on a duplex in a quiet neighborhood outside Richmond, where nothing happens slowly enough. I moved in 2 years ago because the rent was low, the walls were thick, and the backyard had a fence tall enough that I could drink coffee in boxers without alarming the hoe. I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for less of everything, actually. Fewer people. Fewer obligations. Fewer reasons to be anywhere I didn't choose. Her name was Nora Bellingham. She moved into the other half of the duplex 11 months after me, on a Sunday, carrying a box labeled kitchen stuff, or maybe towels and handwriting, that suggested she had given up on organization as a concept. She was maybe 30. Maybe 31. She worked as a veterinary technician at a clinic across town, which I learned on day 3 because she came home smelling like antiseptic and dog shampoo, and still managed to look like someone who had just stepped out of a photograph you'd keep in your wallet if you were the type of person who still carried a wallet. She had dark hair she wore in a braid that always came half undone by evening, a scar on her left wrist she never explained. And she carried a battered paperback everywhere. The same one, a copy of Persuasion so dog-eared it looked like it had been read during a hurricane. I saw it on her patio chair, on the kitchen counter through the window, tucked under her arm when she walked to the mailbox barefoot. That book was less a novel and more a companion. I wondered sometimes what she saw in a story about 2 people who missed each other for years before finding their way back. I did not let myself wonder for long. She was sharp. Funny in a way that landed 3 seconds after she said it, so you were always laughing late. She had a habit of knocking on my door at odd hours, once at 11 p.m., to ask if I had a Phillips head screwdriver, once at 7 a.m., to tell me a bird had gotten into her bathroom and she needed a brave person or a broom, ideally both. She borrowed my Wi-Fi password and never gave it back. She left cookies on my doorstep without a note and then denied making them when I thanked her. She was, in every measurable way, a terrible neighbor. She was also the reason I had started finding excuses to be in my backyard between 4 and 6 p.m. on weekends. I told myself it was for the sun. The sun did not require me to rearrange my entire Saturday schedule. So, the afternoon in question. It was late June, the kind of heat that makes the air itself feel tired. I could smell cut grass and hot concrete, and the faint sweetness of the jasmine she had planted along our shared fence line without asking. I was sitting on my back step with a glass of water, pretending to read something on my phone, when Nora came out onto her side of the patio in a swimsuit and a pair of oversized sunglasses that made her look like a very stylish insect. She set her chair at the exact angle where the afternoon light hit her shoulders, put Persuasion face down on the armrest, and closed her eyes. I did not stare. I glanced, repeatedly, with the intensity and subtlety of a man trying to memorize a painting before the museum closes. The fence between our patios was only waist-high, a decorative suggestion of privacy rather than an actual boundary. She was 10 feet away. The sun was turning her shoulders gold. A strand of hair had escaped her braid and was stuck to the side of her neck. I was thinking about that strand of hair with a level of focus I usually reserve for quarterly deadlines when she opened one eye. "Caleb, yeah, you're staring. I'm looking in your general direction." The sun is over there. The sun is behind you. I looked up. The sun was, in fact, behind me. I had poor navigational instincts when Nora Bellingham was within 10 feet. She sat up, pushed her sunglasses onto her head, and held up a bottle of sunscreen. "Can you help me with my back? I can't reach, and I'm going to burn." This was a reasonable request between neighbors. This was practical. This was dermatological self-care. There was no reason for my chest to do whatever it had just done. "Sure," I said, with the casual tone of a man whose blood pressure had not just spiked. I stepped over the fence. It was waist-high, as noted, so this was less dramatic than it sounds, and she turned around in the chair, pulling her braid over one shoulder. She handed me the sunscreen without looking. Her back was warm. The lotion was cold. I could feel every single vertebra through her skin, and I was suddenly aware that I had never been this close to her without a wall, a counter, or a passive-aggressive argument about recycling bin placement between us. I was also aware that my hands were doing something they should not have been doing, which was shaking. "You missed a spot," she said. "Where higher here?" "Little to the left." "Nora, I am running out of back." She laughed. Not her usual sharp laugh, something softer, something that came out like she hadn't planned it. She turned her head just slightly, and for 1 second, maybe less, I could see the edge of her expression. She wasn't smiling about the sunscreen. That bothered me more than it should have. I finished, capped the bottle, handed it back, and stepped over the fence like a man retreating from a situation he was not emotionally equipped to process. She said thanks without turning around. I said any time without meaning it that casually, and then I went inside and stood at the kitchen sink for 4 minutes, letting the tap run cold over my wrists. I blamed the heat. The heat was innocent. I blamed it anyway. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and replayed the moment her head turned. The angle of her jaw. The way her laugh had come out soft and wrong, like it had escaped from somewhere she usually kept locked. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself neighbors help neighbors with sunscreen, and it does not mean anything. I told myself I was not a person who developed feelings for the woman on the other side of a shared wall based on the curve of her shoulder and the sound of a laugh that didn't match. I was not convincing. Things shifted after the sunscreen. Not dramatically. Not the way they do in movies, where a single moment rewrites the entire dynamic overnight. It was more like a crack in a wall. You don't notice it widening until one day the light comes through. She started finding more reasons to knock. A leaking pipe she could have fixed herself. A jar she could have opened with a rubber band. A question about whether I thought her patio plants were dying. Delivered while standing close enough that I could smell her shampoo, lavender, every time, like she was trying to make me associate relaxation with cardiac arrest. And I started noticing things I had trained myself not to. The way she stood in her kitchen at night, reading that same battered copy of Persuasion under the overhead light, twisting her braid around one finger. I could see her through the window above my sink if I stood at the right angle, which I should not have known, but did. The way she said my name, not Caleb like a neighbor, but Caleb like a word she was testing the weight of. The way she went quiet whenever I mentioned anyone else, not jealous quiet, just listening too carefully quiet. Like she was holding something behind her teeth and checking whether this was the moment to let it go. Once, I came home from a work dinner, a colleague's birthday, nothing significant, and found a note on my door. Just a post-it. It said, "Thought you were home. Brought you leftover pasta. It's in a container by your door, N." The pasta was cold by the time I found it, which meant she had brought it over hours earlier. which meant she had been checking whether I was home, which meant she had noticed I wasn't. I ate cold pasta, standing at my kitchen counter at 11 p.m., and thought about a woman who noticed my absence. That is not a thought that leads anywhere safe. I had it anyway. Another time, on a rainy Tuesday, I was carrying groceries from my car and one of the bags tore. Oranges everywhere, rolling down the driveway in the rain like they were making a break for freedom. Nora appeared from nowhere. She must have been watching from her window and helped me chase them down without a single word. We crouched in the rain picking up wet oranges, and she was laughing, and her braid was soaked and plastered to her neck, and I realized I had never been happier picking fruit up off the ground in my entire life. She handed me the last orange. Our fingers touched, and she pulled her hand back one beat too fast. I cataloged that. I should not have been cataloging anything. My survival instincts around Nora Bellingham were functionally decorative. One Thursday evening, the air thick and still, I was at my desk working late when I heard her come home. Her car door, her keys, the click of her front door, which shared a wall with my office. Then, through the drywall, faintly, her voice on the phone. "No, Mom, no. He's just my neighbor." A pause. Because it's complicated. A longer pause. Because I don't know if he... Mom, stop. I'm not having this conversation through drywall. Her footsteps moved away from the wall. I sat very still. My cursor blinked on a half-finished paragraph about supply chain integration, and I could not remember a single word of it. My chest was doing something I did not authorize. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the silence on the other side of the wall, and wondering how many times she had stood there, knowing I was right here. She didn't knock that night. That was the tell. She always knocked. The absence of the knock was louder than any conversation we had ever had. The following Saturday, her sister visited. Lena, younger, louder. The kind of person who says the quiet part out loud and then looks around like she's waiting for applause. I was grilling on my side of the patio, the smell of charcoal and hickory smoke drifting in the evening heat, when they came outside, and Lena spotted me over the fence within 30 seconds. So this is the famous Caleb. Famous is generous. Nora talks about you constantly. Like, constantly. I thought you were going to be taller. Lena, Nora's voice had a warning in it I had never heard before. Low, controlled. The voice of a woman watching a grenade pin get pulled in slow motion. What? I'm just saying. You described him like he was. Lena, do you want the tour or not? They went inside. Through the window, I could see Nora steering her sister away from the kitchen, with both hands on her shoulders. Lena was grinning. Nora was not. I stood at my grill and turned a burger that did not need turning. She described him like he was... What? That sentence sat in my head for the rest of the weekend like a song with only one verse. I tried to fill in the ending, and every version made my pulse do something inadvisable. 2 weeks later, the air conditioner broke. Hers, not mine. Late July. 102 degrees outside. The pavement was still radiating heat at 9 p.m., and the air smelled like baked earth and exhaustion. She knocked. 3 quick raps, her usual pattern, with damp hair and a look on her face that was half exhaustion, half something I couldn't name. My AC is dead. The repair guy can't come until Monday. That's 2 days from now. I'm aware. You'll die. Also aware. I stepped aside. Guest room's yours. She looked at me for 1 beat too long. Then she walked in carrying persuasion and a toothbrush, like a woman who had packed for exactly this emergency and no one else's. I set her up in the guest room. Clean sheets. Fan from the closet. a glass of water on the nightstand. She stood in the doorway watching me smooth a pillowcase and said nothing for long enough that I turned around. What? Nothing. She looked away too quickly. You didn't have to do this. You'd have done the same. No, I'd have made you sleep on the couch. That tracks. She smiled. Not her sharp smile. The other one. The one that came out only when she forgot to be careful. Then she closed the door, and I stood in the hallway like a man who had just given away the only room in the house that didn't share a wall with his bedroom, and was only now understanding the full implications. I did not sleep. I lay in bed listening to the fan in the next room and the faint sound of pages turning. She was reading, of course, Persuasion again, a book about people who waited too long and almost missed everything, and I thought about Nora Bellingham 6 feet away through drywall and 34 years of emotional self-preservation, and wondered whether either one was thick enough. In the morning, I found her in my kitchen. She was making coffee. My coffee. In my kitchen, wearing a t-shirt I was fairly sure she'd taken from the laundry basket on the guest room floor. One of mine. A faded blue thing with a software conference logo on it, hanging off one shoulder in a way that should not have been devastating, but was. She had Persuasion open on the counter. The morning light was coming through the window above the sink and catching the side of her face, and the whole room smelled like dark roast and lavender. She looked like she belonged there, not like a guest, like a missing piece. Something in my chest shifted, not dramatically, just enough. I used your coffee, she said, without looking up. I can see that. And your shirt. I can see that too. You're staring again. You're in my kitchen wearing my shirt, reading a 200-year-old novel about missed chances. I'm allowed to stare. She looked up, held my gaze. 1 second. 2. Her fingers tightened once around the coffee mug. Caleb, yeah, why did you give me the guest room? Because you needed somewhere cool to sleep. You have a couch. The couch is uncomfortable. That's never stopped you from offering it to anyone else. Jake slept on that couch for a week when his girlfriend kicked him out. Jake isn't you. That landed. I watched it land. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did, like a door opening half an inch. Why? She said quietly. I should have deflected. I should have made a joke about property values or neighbor relations, or the fact that my guest room sheets were nicer than my couch cushions. My domestic hospitality standards were becoming a liability. But instead, I said the true thing. Because when your act broke, the first thing I felt wasn't inconvenience. It was relief. Because it meant you'd be here. The kitchen went very still. The only sound was the coffee maker clicking off and the fan still turning in the guest room down the hall. She set the coffee mug down, too carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't steady. She closed Persuasion and pressed her palm flat on its cover like she was steadying herself against it. I changed your name in my phone, she said. To what, after that day with the sunscreen? When you stepped over the fence and your hands were shaking and you thought I couldn't tell. She paused. She was looking at the counter, not at me. Her voice had dropped just a little. I changed it to maybe. Capital M. Maybe, because every time you knocked or texted or stood on your side of the fence pretending not to look at me, I thought, maybe this time he'll say something. Maybe this time I won't have to pretend I came over because of a jar I could have opened myself. She looked up. Her eyes were bright, not wet, bright, like something behind them had caught fire. I have been opening jars by myself since I was 12, Caleb. I did not move. I did not trust myself to move. My kitchen smelled like coffee and lavender shampoo and something that felt dangerously like the future. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "We can drink coffee and pretend this is a normal Saturday, and I will never mention the word maybe again." She didn't move either. She didn't take the exit. She just stood there, holding my gaze, and I watched her decide. "I don't want a normal Saturday," she said. "I want this one." I stepped forward. She stepped forward. The distance between the counter and the doorway where I'd been standing was maybe 4 feet, and crossing it felt like the longest walk of my entire life. I reached out and touched the side of her face, gently, carefully, like she was something I'd been afraid to break. She leaned into my hand and closed her eyes. "Every woman I've dated felt like I was waiting for something," I said. "You're the thing I was waiting for, and I've known that since the bird in your bathroom." She laughed, a real one, wet and surprised. "The bird. You showed up at my door at 7 a.m., holding a broom like a sword, and I thought, oh, it's her. It's been her this whole time." She kissed me. Or I kissed her. It happened in the space between one breath and the next, and I could not tell you who moved first. It was gentle and warm and tasted like my coffee, and halfway through it her phone buzzed on the counter. She pulled back just enough to glance at the screen. "It's Lena." "What does it say?" She turned the phone toward me. The text read, "Did you finally tell him, or are you still pretending your act is broken?" I looked at her. She looked at the ceiling. "Your act works?" "It works fine." "Nora," I panicked. I had a plan, and then I panicked, and the plan became lie about home appliances. That is deception with better branding. I started laughing. She started laughing. We stood in my kitchen at 8 in the morning, her in my shirt, me in whatever was left of my composure, laughing about a fabricated vac emergency, and for the first time in 2 years, my duplex felt like it was exactly the right size. 3 months later, she still hadn't officially moved any of her things into my side of the house, but somehow her toothbrush was in my bathroom, her shampoo was in my shower, and persuasion had migrated permanently to my nightstand. She still knocked before she came over. I still pretended to be surprised every time. A year after that, we knocked out the wall between our kitchens. Literally, the landlord made us pay for it. But Nora argued the property value case so convincingly that he ended up thanking us. She was terrifying in negotiations. I was mostly there for moral support and drywall removal. Years later, when people asked how we got together, she always said, "He was staring at me through a waist-high fence, and I decided to make him useful." I always said, "She lied about her air conditioning to sleep in my guest room." She would look at me with those dark eyes and that braid coming undone, and that copy of Persuasion somewhere nearby. Always nearby. And one of us would say, "It was never the act. It wasn't. It was never the sunscreen either. It was every knock, every borrowed screwdriver, every jar she didn't need opened, every evening she spent reading a book she had already finished on a patio 10 feet from mine." It was a year of almosts and maybes. And then one morning in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and lavender, it was finally, quietly, enough. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding. What would you have done if your neighbor caught you staring and then asked you to help with sunscreen? And have you ever spent months pretending you didn't feel something, until one morning you just couldn't pretend anymore? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.